23 guests saw what Hartford's upper class would later call the most shocking wedding ceremony in Connecticut's history on the morning of the 13th of October, 1841. Bridget O'Sullivan, 19, fell to the floor at the altar of Trinity Episcopal Church just minutes after taking her first sip of ceremonial wine. Her wedding dress pooled around her shaking body as white foam came out of her mouth. "The wine, it burns," the bride said in a desperate whisper that the front pew could hear. What authorities found 3 days later would reveal a cold-blooded murder so planned that the Hartford Courant wouldn't print the full details, fearing public outrage. The killer sat among the guests at the wedding, watching every painful moment with the calmness of someone who had planned every detail for months. The truth about what happened that fall morning shows a web of social hatred, financial need, and maternal obsession that would change Hartford's upper-class society forever. In 1841, Hartford was at the crossroads of old New England traditions and new industrial progress. Steamboats full of goods from New York traveled up and down the Connecticut River, and new factories sprang up along its banks. Their smokestacks fought with church spires for the top spot in the skyline. The city's population had grown to almost 13,000 people, with Irish immigrants coming in to work the mills and railroads that promised wealth to anyone who was willing to work hard from dawn to dusk. The Petons were the most respected of all the old families in Hartford. From her federal-style mansion on Prospect Street, Ella Lenina Peton, 48, who had been widowed for 6 years, ruled over one of the city's most important households. The 3-story brick house, with its perfectly manicured gardens and wrought iron fencing, was a symbol of everything the old Connecticut elite stood for: stability, tradition, and unquestionable social superiority. Ella Lenina wasn't born into money. She was the daughter of a moderately successful Hartford merchant, and when she married Jonathan Peton in 1815, she married above her station. Jonathan, who inherited a shipping fortune from the War of 1812, chose Eleanor because she was beautiful and smart, not because of her family background. Their marriage was based on love, which shocked some people in Hartford society, but Jonathan's success in growing the family business into insurance and manufacturing silenced most of his critics. William, their only child, was born in 1817 after Ella Lenina had 3 miscarriages. This made her believe he was a miracle. She put all of her time and energy into raising him and making sure he got the best education possible. William went to Yale College to study law and literature. In 1839, he came back to Hartford to work with his father's business interests. William Peton was one of Hartford's most eligible bachelors. He was tall and smart, with dark hair like his father's and sharp gray eyes like his mother's. When Jonathan died suddenly of apoplexy in 1835, Ella Lenina became the owner of an estate worth about $40,000. This made her one of the richest women in Connecticut. She was in charge of the family's investments and was determined to keep their wealth and social status. Eleanor wanted to keep the Peton name open doors all over New England. The number of Irish people moving to Hartford grew quickly in the 1832 because of poverty and crop failures in Ireland. These new people moved into small apartments near the railroad depot that didn't have good plumbing. They worked for wages that people who lived there thought were unfair, but their willingness to work for so little made things cheaper for factory owners and made American-born workers angry. Ella Lenina was more and more worried about these changes. At Ladies' Aid Society meetings, she heard complaints about Irish servants who supposedly stole from their bosses, Irish kids who fought with American kids, and Irish families who crammed 10 people into spaces meant for 4. People in Hartford's established families began to talk about the Irish problem in low voices, wondering if these Catholic immigrants would ever really become Americans. The O'Sullivan family moved into this tense social climate in late 1839. Patrick O'Sullivan, a 8-year-old widower, moved to Hartford with his 4 kids after hearing about job openings in the city's growing mills. Bridget, his oldest daughter, was 17 when they got there. She was a beautiful young woman with auburn hair and emerald eyes that seemed to catch the light even in Hartford's gray winter months. Patrick got a job as a supervisor at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company. His experience with machinery in Dublin's textile mills came in handy there. With his salary, he could rent a small but nice house on Front Street, which was closer to Hartford Center than most Irish families could afford. Bridget got a job as a seamstress at one of the nicer dress shops on State Street. Customers liked her because she was good with delicate fabrics and could speak without a heavy accent. Bridget first met William Peyton at a public lecture series at Wadsworth Atheneum. Hartford's intellectual elite came to hear a visiting professor from Harvard talk about American literature. Bridget went because her boss, Mrs. Catherine Hendris, had told her Irish workers to improve themselves through education and culture. William saw her right away, sitting in the back section for working people. He was impressed by how intently Bridget listened. When the teacher asked for questions, she raised her hand and asked about how Irish poetry has affected American writers. Her question was so well thought out and worded that several people turned to look at her in surprise. William went up to her after the lecture while she was putting on her cloak. He took off his hat and said, "That was a great question about the influence of Irish literature. I'm William Peyton. I don't think we've met before." Bridget's cheeks turned a little red, but her voice stayed steady. "Mr. Peyton, I'm Bridget O'Sullivan. I'm happy to meet you." They walked together toward State Street, easily talking about books and ideas. William found out that Bridget had read a lot. Even though she didn't have much formal education, she had read everything from Shakespeare to modern American authors. A kind priest in Dublin lent her books, and she kept reading whatever she could find in Hartford's lending libraries. William stopped when they got to the corner where their paths split. "Miss O'Sullivan, would you like to come to next week's lecture? It's about American history, and I think you might find it interesting." Bridget's smile changed her whole face. "I would really like that, Mr. Peyton." Their courtship started off quietly and carefully. William knew that being interested in an Irish working girl would have social consequences, but Bridget's intelligence and grace made him think that these things were small and not worth worrying about. They walked along the Connecticut River, went to lectures and cultural events, and found that they were compatible despite their different backgrounds. Ella Lenana didn't know about these changes for almost 6 months. William had always kept his personal life private, so she thought that his frequent absences from home were because he was busy with work or socializing with young men of his own class. The news came out on a hot July afternoon in 1840. Ella Lenana had planned to surprise William by going to his office at the Peyton Building on State Street. She brought him cold lemonade and news that he had been invited to the governor's summer reception. She heard voices coming from behind William's office door as she climbed the stairs to the second floor. One was a woman's voice she didn't know, and the other was William's deep voice. William said, "My mother will never accept this. But Bridget, I don't care what she thinks anymore. I love you, and that's all that matters." Eleanor stopped on the landing, gripping the lemonade pitcher so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Your family's place in society," the woman said, her voice having a slight Irish accent that made Ella Lenana's blood run cold. "William, I don't want to cause trouble between you and your mother. She gave up so much for you." William said firmly, "You don't get it. Since Father died, she's been in charge of every part of my life. Who I should marry, where I should live, and how I should spend my time. I'm 23 years old, and I've never made a big decision without her permission. That ends now." Ella Lenana pushed herself against the wall, her heart racing so fast that she was afraid they could hear it through the door. "When are you going to tell her about us?" the woman asked. "Soon. Very soon. I want you to meet her as my future wife. She'll see what I see in you, your intelligence, your kindness, and your strength. She'll have to accept that I've chosen the woman I want to spend my life with." The noise of a chair scraping on the floor made Ella Lenana run down the stairs, leaving the lemonade on the landing. She got to her carriage in a state of near panic and told her driver to take her home right away. During the short ride to Prospect Street, her shock turned into a rage so strong and all-consuming that she felt sick. A girl from Ireland? Her William, who would inherit the Peyton name and fortune, was going to marry an Irish immigrant? This nobody, who had probably seduced her innocent son with planned charm, would destroy everything she had worked for and sacrificed to keep safe. William came home for dinner that night, and he seemed happier than he had in months. Ella Lenana paid close attention to him as he carved the roast, noticing how he hummed to himself and how happy he looked. She wanted to confront him right away and ask him why, but she had learned to be patient over the years. She needed to know more before she could do anything useful. She said, You seem to be in a great mood tonight, William. In a light tone. Do I? Well, I guess I am. I've been thinking about making some big changes in my life. William put down his fork and looked right at her. What kind of changes? Mom, I've met someone. She's a young woman with great character and intelligence. I think she might be the one I want to marry. When Elenina reached for her glass of water, her hand shook a little. How nice, dear. Do I know anyone? No, but I can't wait for you to meet her. Her name is Bridget O'Sullivan, and she's... He paused as if he needed to gather his courage. She's from Ireland originally. Her family moved to Hartford 2 years ago. Elenina dropped the glass of water, which broke on her plate. Oh, how clumsy of me, she said, as she got up to call the servants. You said O'Sullivan, which is an Irish family name. Yes, her father works at Colt's factory, and she works at Mrs. Hendriss's dress shop. I know what you're thinking, but Eleanor cut in. I'm not thinking anything, William, and her voice was calm. I'm just surprised you've never talked about this young woman before. I wanted to be sure of how I felt before talking to you about her, but now I am. I love her, Mother, and I will ask her to marry me. Eleanor spent the rest of the night in her private sitting room, walking back and forth on the Persian carpet until she made a visible path in the pattern. She heard William's words over and over in her head. He loved this Irish girl and wanted to marry her. The implications hit her like punches in the stomach. William's social standing would go down the drain if he married an Irish immigrant. The best families in Hartford would not let him in. His kids would have to deal with the stigma of having parents from different backgrounds. The established elite wouldn't fully accept them, and the Irish community would see them as traitors to their roots. The financial risk was more immediate. If William married this girl, Elenina would no longer have any say in family matters. The Irish woman would have legal rights to the Piton fortune if she married him. She might be able to get William to help her extended family, give money to Catholic causes, or put money into projects that helped immigrants at the expense of established American businesses. Elenina had worked hard to get from a merchant-class background to the top of Hartford society. She didn't want to see an Irish peasant ruin everything she had worked for. She wouldn't let her family's money go to waste on Irish relatives and Catholic churches. She didn't want the Piton name to be associated with poverty and superstition in other countries. Eleanor carefully looked into the O'Sullivan family over the next few weeks. She found out that Patrick O'Sullivan was thought to be a good worker, but he had been in labor talks that some people thought might be subversive. People at work and customers liked Bridget, but some wealthy women in the area whispered about how wrong it was for an Irish girl to act like she was better than she was. Elenina also learned that the O'Sullivans went to Mass at Holy Trinity Church, a Catholic church that many Protestant residents of Hartford didn't trust or believe in. She was horrified at the idea of her grandchildren being raised as Catholics and having to answer to a foreign pope. William's relationship with Bridget grew stronger as summer turned into fall. He took her to a few public events and proudly and affectionately introduced her to his friends. Elenina watched from a distance as Hartford society reacted with polite surprise that quickly turned into whispered speculation. William's announcement in early September that he wanted to formally propose was the last straw. He told his mother over breakfast, "I've talked to Mr. O'Sullivan. He said I could ask for Bridget's hand. I'm going to do it tonight." Elenina put down her coffee cup carefully. "William, I need you to think about this choice again." "Mom, please let me finish. I haven't said anything about this relationship because I thought it would run its natural course. But now you're talking about marriage, which is a permanent commitment that will affect not only your life, but also the future of our family." William's jaw got tight. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that marriage is about more than just feelings. It's about being able to get along with others, having the same values, and coming from the same background. This young woman may be very nice, but she comes from a world that is very different from ours. The differences that seem cute now will cause problems later. Her past doesn't matter to me. It should matter. It will matter to your kids, who will have a hard time finding their place in society. It will matter to your business partners, who expect their partners to meet certain standards. It will matter to everyone we know." William stood up quickly, and his chair scraped against the floor. "Mother, I'm disappointed in you. I thought someone who married for love would do better. Your father and I were in similar situations, so we knew what each other expected and what we had to do. This is a whole different situation. The only thing that makes you different is that you don't like the Irish." Finally, Elelanina's mask of calm fell off. "It's not prejudice, William. It's the truth. These people are not like us. They have different loyalties, values, and priorities. This girl will change you, and not for the better," William said in a cold voice. "This conversation is over. I'm going to ask Bridget to marry me tonight, with or without your blessing." Eleanor sat alone in the dining room for almost an hour after he left, staring at her untouched breakfast. The color was set. William would not change his mind about anything, even threats. He was going to marry this Irish girl. And when he did, Elelanina would lose control of the family fortune and legacy for good, unless she did something to stop it. On the 15th of September, 1840, the Hartford Courant reported that William Petton and Bridget O'Sullivan were getting married. The short notice in the society section got more people talking than any other social news in a long time. People in tea rooms and men's clubs all over the city argued about whether William had gone crazy or just fallen for the charms of an Irish woman. Elelanina pretended to be graciously accepting, but inside, she was angry. She went to social events where well-meaning friends congratulated her, while also showing barely hidden sympathy. "Oh, how progressive of William," they would say, their voices full of scandal. "I'm sure the girl is a good fit." At a Ladies' Aid Society meeting, Mrs. Harrison Fitzgerald, whose Irish ancestry Hartford Society conveniently forgot about, made a pointed comment about how important it is to keep proper standards in marriage. This was the worst time. "Of course we have to be nice to these immigrant families," she said, looking at Eleanor in a way that made it clear what she meant. "But there are limits that shouldn't be crossed." Eleanor smiled tightly and changed the subject, but the shame burned in her chest like acid. Women who had once looked up to her because of her social status were now treating her like a child. People were starting to talk behind the Piton name's back and make snide comments about it. Elelanina started to study Bridget O'Sullivan with the same level of detail as a military strategist would study an enemy position. She went to public events where the couple was present and watched how Bridget moved, talked, and interacted with Hartford's elite. What she saw only made her more worried. Bridget was not the simple Irish peasant that Eleanor had hoped to find. The young woman had a natural grace that couldn't be taught, an intelligence that showed in the way she talked, and a real warmth that made people want to be around her. Even the most harsh critics of Elelanina among the society matrons agreed that the O'Sullivan girl had amazing poise for someone from her background. What was even more troubling was how deeply William cared. He looked at Bridget with love that Eleanor had never seen from him before. He unconsciously matched his longer stride to hers when they walked together. He paid full attention when she talked. When people made small social mistakes, he fiercely protected her, which made Elelanina feel uncomfortable because it reminded her of how Jonathan had once protected her from the same thing. The wedding was set for October 13. William wanted a small wedding, but Bridget insisted on inviting both families and their closest friends. She said, "I want everyone we care about to hear our vows. I don't want anyone to think we're ashamed of our marriage or trying to hide it." Elelanina knew that a public wedding would make her feel even Everson's. Worse, if only to satisfy their curiosity about the Irish bride. Every important family in Hartford would be there. People would talk about and pick apart the ceremony for months, which would make the Piton name even more linked to social decline. Elelanina's desperation grew as September turned into October. She thought about different ways to mess up the wedding plans. She could say she got sick all of a sudden, which would mean William had to put off the ceremony to take care of her. She might try to bribe Patrick O'Sullivan to take back his agreement. She could even say that she would cut William off completely. But each choice had risks that were too high. William might go through with the wedding, even if she is sick or makes threats. Bribing the father could go very wrong if he told the whole community about her attempt. And if she disinherited William, she would lose control of him forever and make sure that her money went to strangers. Elelanina got the answer during a night in early October when she couldn't sleep. She was going through her late husband's papers, looking for a way to keep control of the family assets. when she came across Jonathan's letters to a business partner in New York who sold rare chemicals for industrial use. One of the letters went into great detail about different chemicals used in manufacturing and how they can be harmful to people's health if not handled properly. One letter talked about arsenic oxide, which is often used in making textiles and can be bought through legal business channels. Jonathan had looked into using it in a proposed fabric treatment process, but he decided not to invest because he was worried about safety. The letter gave exact details about the compound's properties, such as how it looked, a white crystalline powder that dissolved easily in liquids, how it tasted almost undetectable when mixed with strong flavors, and how it worked symptoms that came on quickly and were similar to those of many common illnesses. The most important thing the correspondent said was that arsenic oxide was hard to find without complicated chemical tests that weren't usually done when someone suddenly got sick. Ella Lanena read the letter 3 times, and her heart raced as she understood what it meant. This was a way to stop William's marriage that would seem completely normal. Sad, but unavoidable. It would be shocking but not unheard of for the bride to get sick during the wedding ceremony. Young women sometimes gave in to the stress and excitement of their wedding day, especially those from lower social classes who might have been overwhelmed by how grand it was. The plan became crystal clear in a shocking way. Ella Lanena would have to get arsenic oxide from her late husband's business contacts, saying she was still looking into how it could be used in industry. She would have to find a way to give it to them during the wedding ceremony, when everyone was paying attention to the bride and groom. She would also have to act like a worried mother-in-law who was watching a tragedy. 5 days before the wedding, on October 8th, Ella Lanena went to the Hartwell Chemical Supply offices in New York City. She got on the train early in the morning, dressed in her best travel clothes, and brought Jonathan's business letters as proof of her identity. Mr. Hartwell, who was thin and had nervous hands and wire-rimmed glasses, thought highly of Jonathan. A careful businessman, he told Eleanor, always worried about safety and following the rules. How can I help you, Mrs. Paton? Eleanor said that she was taking care of her late husband's business and wanted to finish his investigation into how textiles are treated. She brought out Jonathan's letters and talked intelligently about the proposed applications, having spent days going over the technical details. Yes, arsenic oxide, Hartwell said, looking at his notes. Your husband wanted to know how it could be used to protect fabric. Are you going to go through with the investment? I still need to think about the business potential, Ella Lanena said smoothly. But I'd like to do some preliminary tests to get a better idea of the compound's properties. Could you send me a small sample for testing? Hartwell nodded and went into his storeroom. He came back with a glass vial that held about 2 ounces of white powder. This should be enough for your tests. Please follow all safety rules. The compound is very poisonous if you eat or breathe it in. Ella Lanena paid in cash and carefully put the vial in her purse. She held her purse close to her body on the train ride back to Hartford, fully aware of what was inside that could kill her. She didn't feel guilty. Instead, she felt a grim sense of satisfaction that she had done something to protect her family's future. The last few days flew by as they got ready for the wedding. Bridget asked Ella Lanena to help her plan the reception, which Ella Lanena thought was both sweet and annoying. The young woman clearly wanted to get her future mother-in-law's approval by being kind and respectful. Bridget said, I want you to feel like this is your celebration too, Mrs. Paton. As they went over the menu for the wedding breakfast, William talks about you with so much love and respect. I hope that one day you will feel the same way about me. Eleanor was able to smile and nod in the right places, while also figuring out how much arsenic oxide she would need to make sure that the death was quick but looked natural. If she took too little, she might get sick without reaching her goal. If she took too much, she might show signs that would make people suspicious. Ella Lanena figured out that about half a teaspoon of the powder dissolved in wine would be enough based on Jonathan's letters and her own research in medical books she borrowed from Hartford's library. The symptoms would start within minutes and get worse quickly, like the effects of extreme excitement or heart failure. Ella Lanena woke up before dawn on October 13th with a sense of purpose that she hadn't had in months. She had gone over every part of the plan in her head dozens of times. She knew exactly when and how she would act, and this made her very determined. The wedding was set to take place at Trinity Episcopal Church at 11 a.m., and the reception would follow at the Piton Mansion. Ella Lenina had volunteered to be in charge of getting the drinks ready, which meant she would have full access to the ceremonial wine that would be served to the bride and groom during the blessing. She put on her best dark blue silk gown and the pearl necklace Jonathan had given her on their wedding day. In the bedroom mirror, she saw a woman with dignified composure, just like the respected Hartford matron who was going to her son's wedding. No one who saw her would have guessed that every careful move she made was meant to kill. The arsenic oxide was hidden in a small silk bag that was sewn into the dress's inner pocket. The powder had been carefully measured and prepared the night before so that it could be dissolved in wine at the right time. Ella Lenina had practiced the motion dozens of times to make sure she could quickly and naturally empty the sachet while seeming to be adjusting the wine service. Ella Lenina got to Trinity Church at 9 to oversee the last-minute details. The Gothic Revival building had a tall spire and stained glass windows. It was decorated with fall flowers and ribbons in gold and burgundy. Bridget couldn't afford fancy decorations, but the simple ones had a quiet beauty that even Ella Lenina had to admit. Father Matthews, the old Episcopal priest who would lead the service, greeted Ella Lenina with kind respect. "Mrs. Peton, how nice to see you. I hear you've been a big part of putting together today's party." "You're welcome, Father," Ella Lenina said in a smooth voice. "This is a very happy time for our family." She moved quickly through the church, checking the flower arrangements and making sure the chairs were set up correctly for the reception. But her real focus was on the communion table, where the ceremonial wine would be set. The heavy silver chalice, which Eleanor gave to the couple as a wedding gift, was ready for the blessing that would come after they said their vows. The church vestry held the wine and other snacks that would be served after the ceremony. Ella Lenina had asked for a bottle of their best French wine to be opened for the occasion. She told Father Matthews that she wanted William and Bridget to start their marriage with the best of everything. The first guests started to show up at 10:30. Ella Lenina stood near the church entrance and greeted each person who came in with perfect social grace. She saw Patrick O'Sullivan lead his 3 younger children to their seats and noticed that he had clearly spent a lot of money on new clothes for the event. Ella Lenina's anger flared up again when she saw how proud he was of his daughter's marriage to a Peton. Members of Hartford's upper class arrived in fancy carriages, their faces carefully blank as they took in the mix of social classes among the guests. Ella Lenina saw how they reacted in small ways, like how they nodded politely to the Irish families while keeping their distance. The social dynamics she had predicted were already happening just as she had thought they would. William got there at 10:45 with his best man, Charles Whitman. Ella Lenina felt a real pang of love when she saw her son nervously adjust his cravat and talk in low tones with Father Matthews about how the ceremony was going. He looked good and happy, totally unaware that his mother was about to save him from making the biggest mistake of his life. The church bells rang at exactly 11, and Bridget came into view at the back of the nave. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, even though she didn't want it to. The young woman was truly beautiful. Her auburn hair was styled in a way that went well with the simple but perfectly fitted white gown she had sewn herself. She held a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, and her face was so happy that it seemed to light up the whole church. As they walked down the aisle, Patrick O'Sullivan held his daughter's arm and walked proudly beside her. Eleanor saw that many of the guests smiled without meaning to when they saw the beautiful bride. Even some of Hartford's most socially rigid matrons seemed moved by Bridget's obvious happiness and grace. The ceremony was very serious, as is usual for Episcopalians. Father Matthews talked about how sacred marriage is, how important it is for both partners to respect and love each other, and how couples who build their marriage on strong spiritual foundations will be blessed. William and Bridget said their vows in clear, confident voices, and they never took their eyes off of each other. Ella Lenina sat in the front pew, her hand resting over the hidden pouch of poison. She told herself that this terrible thing would end soon, and then William would be able to marry someone of his own class and background. After the rings were exchanged, Father Matthews went to the communion table to start the blessing of the wine. This was Ella Lenina's time to shine. She got up from her chair with practiced grace and walked to the altar, where she was supposed to help with the ceremonial service as the mother of the groom. "Let me help you get the wine ready, Father," she said softly as she moved to stand next to the silver chalice. The priest nodded in thanks and then spoke to the congregation about how important it was for the couple to share wine as a sign of their new union. Ellena's fingers found the sachet in her dress pocket while he was talking. She had practiced her moves so many times that they were perfect. She poured the white powder into the chalice and used a silver spoon to gently stir it into the deep red wine. It was impossible to find any evidence of the arsenic oxide after it had dissolved completely. The wine stayed a deep color and would taste the same as it did before, at least not to someone who was drinking it on their wedding day when they were feeling very emotional. Father Matthews finished speaking and raised the chalice in a ceremonial way. "William and Bridget, please come forward and share the wine of commitment. This represents your promise to be there for each other through all of life's ups and downs." Ellelanena went back to her seat, her heart racing so fast that she was afraid other people could hear it. William and Bridget walked up to the communion table with their hands clasped and big smiles on their faces. Everything was going exactly as planned. Father Matthews gave the chalice to William first. He took a small sip and then gave it to his bride. Bridget took the chalice with both hands, smiled at her new husband, and brought the wine to her lips. Ellelanena was horrified, but fascinated as Bridget drank deeply from the poisoned cup. The young woman's face was full of happiness and thanks as she finished the ceremonial sip and gave the cup back to Father Matthews. They had taken the deadly dose. At this point, all they had to do was wait for the arsenic to work. The wedding party walked down the aisle to the warm applause of the guests. Ellelanena stood in line at the church entrance to accept congratulations and compliments on the beautiful ceremony with a mechanical smile. She was only paying attention to Bridget, looking for the first signs that the poison was starting to work. Ellenanena's research shows that arsenic oxide usually started to hurt people within 15 to 30 minutes of them eating it. The first signs would be very mild, like a little pale skin, trouble breathing, or a little stomach pain. People would easily think that these early signs were just nerves and excitement about the wedding day. Ellenanena's anxiety grew as the minutes went by. Bridget seemed completely normal as she talked happily with well-wishers and laughed at her new husband's jokes. Her cheeks were still pink from happiness, her breathing was steady, and she didn't show any signs of distress. Bridget was still greeting guests with full energy, 25 minutes after drinking the poisoned wine. Eleanor felt the first signs of real panic. Did she get the dose wrong? Was the compound she got somehow broken? Or did this Irish girl have an unusually strong body that could fight off the poison's effects? The wedding party started to walk to the Piton mansion for the breakfast reception. Elena walked next to Father Matthews, making small talk while she was really angry inside. Her carefully planned murder was failing, and she didn't have a backup plan for how to deal with this terrible turn of events. The guests at the mansion met in the main drawing room and the dining room next door. The dining room had more fall flowers and Ellenanena's best china and crystal on the table. The party was greeted with a lavish breakfast spread that included fresh oysters from Long Island Sound, roasted birds, delicate pastries, and several bottles of champagne to toast the new couple. Eleanor got more and more desperate as she went about her duties as hostess. Bridget had eaten the arsenic 45 minutes earlier, but the young woman still looked perfectly healthy. She had taken off her gloves and was accepting congratulations from Hartford's social elite with amazing grace, showing no signs of the symptoms Ellelanena had expected to see by now. "Mrs. Piton," said Mrs. Harrison Fitzgerald as she walked up with a glass of champagne in her hand, "you must be so proud. The ceremony was beautiful, and your new daughter-in-law is so charming. She's much more refined than you'd expect from, well, her background." Ellelanena put on a smile. "Yes, Bridget is a lovely girl. We're very happy with William's choice." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. If the poison didn't work, she would have to live with this Irish peasant as her daughter-in-law for the rest of her life. The O'Sullivan family would be part of the Piton legacy. Their Catholic traditions and ties to immigrants would always be linked to Ellenanena's carefully built reputation. During breakfast, Ellelanena became obsessed with studying Bridget. With William, the young woman went from group to group, accepting well wishes and having lively conversations about their wedding trip to New York City. She seemed to have a normal appetite. She ate small amounts of food with obvious pleasure and drank 2 glasses of champagne without any problems. Bridget showed no signs of being poisoned an hour after it happened. Eleanor left the reception and went to her private study, where she slammed the door behind her with barely controlled rage. She had put everything on the line for this plan, and it was failing spectacularly. The arsenic oxide either didn't work or didn't work well enough to do what it was supposed to do. Eleanor was walking back and forth in her study, trying to come up with a different plan, when she heard noise coming from the drawing room. People were worried and yelling for Dr. Harrison to come right away. Ella Lenina's heart raced with new hope. Maybe the poison just took longer to work than her research said it would. She made her face look like a worried mother and hurried back to the reception. What she found was even better than she had hoped for. Bridget was sitting in Ella Lenina's best wingback chair, and her face was pale and drawn. She was breathing quickly and had one hand on her stomach. William was kneeling next to her chair, looking very worried. Bridget said in a weak voice, "I don't know what's going on. I was fine just a moment ago, and then all of a sudden—" Dr. Harrison, who had been at the wedding and had come right away when called, asked, "What are her symptoms?" William said, "Stomach pain, nausea, and trouble breathing." His voice was tight with worry. "She says her throat hurts." Dr. Harrison, a well-known man in his 60 seconds who had been helping Hartford's wealthy families for decades, started looking at Bridget right away. He felt her pulse, looked into her eyes, and asked her a lot of questions about when the symptoms started and how they were getting worse. Ella Lenina got closer, pretending to be worried about her mother, while secretly celebrating that the poison was taking longer to work, but was clearly working. "Dr. Harrison, is there anything we can do? Should we take her upstairs where she might be more comfortable?" "No, don't move her yet," the doctor said in a serious tone. "Mrs. Peton, please send someone to my office right away to get my medical bag. Also, have your cook make a strong saltwater mixture that the patient can drink as much as they want." As Ella Lenina sent servants on these errands, she saw that Bridget's health was getting worse very quickly. The young woman was having trouble breathing, and even though it was cool outside in October, her forehead was covered in beads of sweat. Her hands shook as she held on to the arms of the chair, and when she tried to talk, her voice was barely a whisper. Bridget managed to say, "The wine," while looking directly at Eleanor with eyes that looked too bright. The church wine tasted weird. Ella Lenina's blood froze. Was Bridget somehow able to tell that the poison was there? Or was this just the confused talk of someone whose brain was being affected by arsenic poisoning? "What do you mean, dear?" Ella Lenina asked, keeping her voice calm. "The wine was from our best vintage. Maybe you're just too excited about everything that happened today." But Dr. Harrison didn't move at all after Bridget said that. He quickly looked up, moving his experienced eyes from the bride to Eleanor and back again. "Mrs. Peton," he said slowly, "what kind of wine was served at the ceremony?" "French vintage from our private cellar," Ella Lenina said. "We've served this wine at family events for years." "Surely you don't think—" Dr. Harrison cut in. "I think we might be dealing with something more serious than wedding day nerves." He looked at William, who was holding Bridget's hand and whispering comforting words. "Mr. Peton, I need you to send someone to Trinity Church right away. They should bring back the chalice that was used for the wine blessing and the rest of the wine from the bottle that was opened for the ceremony." Eleanor's heart began to race with fear. If Dr. Harrison looked at the chalice and found traces of arsenic, her carefully planned plan would fall apart completely. She had to stop that test at all costs. "Doctor, you must be being too careful," she said. "The poor child is just too much for her. Maybe we should move her to a quiet room." "Mrs. Peton," Dr. Harrison said in a calm but firm voice, "I've been a doctor for 37 years. I've seen people get nervous on their wedding day, get food poisoning, and suffer from the effects of different toxic substances. The symptoms this young woman has are consistent with arsenic poisoning." The words hit the drawing room like stones hitting still water, making the guests gasp and shake their heads in disbelief. Several women gasped out loud, and the men moved closer to hear Dr. Harrison's diagnosis better. William's face turned pale. "Poison? That's impossible. How could Bridget have been poisoned? She hasn't eaten or drunk anything that wasn't served to everyone else." "Not everyone else drank from the ceremonial chalice, Doctor," Harrison said in a serious voice. Only the bride and groom drank that wine, and you, Mr. Peaton, don't seem to be upset. Elena's horror grew as she realized that the doctor was methodically ruling out other possible sources of poisoning, and she couldn't help but think of the one time Bridget had eaten something different from the other guests. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to avoid being suspected. Maybe the arsenic came from somewhere else, she said in a desperate tone. These old buildings may have lead pipes or other things that can make them dirty. Eleanor could tell that Dr. Harrison wasn't convinced, though, as she spoke. His sharp eyes were looking at her with such intensity that she felt exposed and weak. She could feel a growing suspicion behind his professional demeanor that made her shiver. At the same time, Bridget's health got worse. Her breathing was getting harder and harder, and she was having a hard time staying awake. Her cheeks had gone from bright red to a scary pale color, and when she tried to talk, only incoherent whispers came out. "We need to get her to my office right away, doctor," Harrison said. "Mr. Peaton, can your carriage fit a stretcher? We need to hurry if we're going to save her life." The word save hit Elelonina like a punch. She thought that once the arsenic worked, Bridget would die quickly, and there would be no way to bring her back. She had never thought that medical help might stop the poison from doing its job. As William organized transportation to Dr. Harrison's office, Elelonina found herself trapped between desperate hope that Bridget would die before reaching medical help and growing terror that the young woman might survive to identify her poisoner. If Bridget lived, and if Dr. Harrison's suspicions continued to develop, Elelonina could face charges of attempted murder. Eleanor was more scared than she had ever been at the thought of standing trial in front of Hartford's legal system, losing her freedom, and ruining her reputation. She would lose everything she had worked for and given up to get it. The ride to Dr. Harrison's office was quiet and scary, and Bridget's condition got worse during the short carriage ride. By the time they arrived at the doctor's practice on Main Street, she was barely conscious, and her breathing had become so shallow that William feared she might die before receiving treatment. Dr. Harrison's office occupied the ground floor of a substantial brick building with examination rooms, a small surgery, and a dispensary where he prepared medications for his patients. Elelonina had visited the office several times over the years for routine ailments, but she had never seen it transformed into the scene of desperate medical intervention that greeted them now. The doctor started giving treatments right away to counteract the effects of arsenic poisoning. He made Bridget drink salt water to make her throw up, hoping to get rid of any poison that was still in her stomach. When that didn't work, he made a mixture of milk and egg whites and told William that these things might help the body get rid of toxins. Elelonina watched these proceedings with mounting anxiety. Every treatment that Dr. Harrison gave Bridget made it more likely that she would live, and if she did, Elelonina would be exposed. She was in the terrible position of hoping for a young woman's death while still acting like a worried mother-in-law. "Mr. Peaton, doctor," Harrison said during a short break in his treatments, "I sent my assistant to Trinity Church to get the ceremonial chalice. He should be back soon with proof that will help us figure out how your wife was poisoned." Elelonina's hands involuntarily clenched at her sides. There would be small amounts of arsenic left in the chalice that would prove Dr. Harrison's diagnosis beyond a shadow of a doubt. Once he had physical proof of poisoning, it would be natural for his investigation to focus on who had access to the wine and the chance to give the poison. The assistant came 20 minutes later with the silver chalice wrapped in a clean cloth and the bottle that had held the ceremonial wine. Dr. Harrison looked at both things very closely, using chemical tests that Elelonina didn't know were possible. "As I feared," he said with a grim look on his face, "there are clear traces of arsenic compounds in this chalice, and the remaining wine shows similar contamination. This was not an accident. Someone deliberately added a large amount of arsenic to the wine that was served to the bride." William was shocked and stared at the doctor. "You're saying that someone tried to kill my wife? But who would do that? Bridget doesn't have any enemies in Hartford." Dr. Harrison's eyes slowly moved around the room, looking at the faces of everyone there. When he looked at Elelonina, she felt like he could see right through her guilty soul. "Dr. Harrison said carefully, the question is, who had access to the ceremonial wine between the time it was made and the time it was drunk?" Elelonina made herself talk in a calm voice. Anyone could have messed with the wine, church staff, wedding guests, or even people who just happened to be in the building. Maybe, Dr. Harrison said, but arsenic oxide is not a common substance. You would need specialized knowledge and connections to chemical suppliers to get it. This was not a crime of opportunity. It required careful planning and preparation. The net was closing in on Eleanor at an alarming rate. Dr. Harrison's methodical approach to the investigation was systematically eliminating alternative explanations and focusing attention on those who possessed both motive and means for the crime. Bridget moved on the examination table, where she had been lying unconscious for almost an hour. She opened her eyes and looked around the room, clearly confused and upset. "William," she said weakly, "what happened? Where am I?" William took her hand and said, "You're in Dr. Harrison's office. You've been very sick, but you'll be fine now." Bridget's eyes moved around the room until they landed on Elelanina. The two women stared at each other for a long time, and Elelanina saw something in the young woman's eyes that made her blood run cold. "I remember now," Bridget said in a soft voice. "The wine. There was something wrong with the wine." Dr. Harrison leaned in closely. "Mrs. Peton, what do you remember about the wine?" "It tasted weird. Not bitter, but different. And I remember seeing—" Bridget stopped, her brow furrowing as she tried to remember. "I remember seeing someone near the chalice during Father Matthews's blessing. That person shouldn't have been there." Eleanor felt like the walls of the room were closing in on her. Bridget's memory was coming back, and with it would come the name that would ruin Elelanina's life forever. "Who did you see, dear?" Dr. Harrison asked in a soft voice. Bridget's eyes went back to Elelanina, and this time there was no question in her eyes. "Mrs. Peton. I saw her stirring something into the wine while Father Matthews was talking to the people." The accusation hit the room like an explosion. William looked at his mother in shock and disbelief, and Dr. Harrison nodded sadly, as if his suspicions had been confirmed. "Mother," William said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't try to kill my wife." Elelanina could feel the last bits of her carefully built facade falling apart. It was time to end the game. There was no longer any reason to act innocent because the truth was out. She would have destroyed everything, Elelanina said in a low voice. She felt a strange sense of relief at finally telling the truth. An Irish immigrant who seduced you with her foreign charm would have taken away your social standing, your family's reputation, and our financial security. Everything we've worked for would have been lost. William stepped back from his mother like she had hit him. "You wanted to kill the woman I love because of her family?" "I tried to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life," Elelanina said, getting more and more defiant. "That girl will drag the Peton name through the mud of Irish politics and Catholic superstition. Your kids would have been outcasts, not accepted by proper society or welcomed by the immigrant community that would have seen them as traitors." William's voice broke with emotion as he said, "Those children would have been your grandchildren. They would have been half-Irish mutts with split loyalties and no place in polite society," Elelanina said sharply. "I would rather see the Peton line end completely than see it become polluted by foreign blood and customs." Dr. Harrison had been listening to this conversation without getting involved, but now he stepped forward with quiet authority. "Mrs. Peton, I'm sorry, but I have to tell the Hartford police about what happened here. You admitted to trying to kill someone in front of a lot of people." Elelanina laughed in a sad way. "Do you think the authorities will go after a well-respected Hartford woman for trying to protect her family from immigrant corruption? Half of the men on the city council agree with me about the Irish problem." "Maybe, Doctor," Harrison said, "but they also know that poisoning is a serious crime, no matter who does it. The law applies to everyone, even rich widows who think their prejudices justify trying to kill someone." The trial of Elelanina Peton started on the 20th of November, 1841, in the Hartford Superior Court. The case got more attention than any other in Connecticut and beyond. Newspapers from Boston to New York followed every detail of the trial. The public was fascinated by the story of a wealthy woman accused of poisoning her son's Irish bride. It was a reflection of the deep social tensions of the time. Judge Samuel Huntington, who was also a member of Hartford's established elite, was very careful to follow the rules of the court during the trial. Even though he knew Elelanina personally, and felt sorry for her social problems. He couldn't ignore the strong evidence against her. Chemical tests, Bridget's eyewitness account, and Ella Lenaina's own confession in the doctor's office all backed up Dr. Harrison's testimony about the arsenic poisoning. Charles Morgan, the district attorney, led the prosecution and said that the case was a planned attempt at murder driven by social bias and greed. Morgan told the jury, "The defendant put her own narrow concerns about social status above the life of an innocent young woman whose only crime was falling in love with the defendant's son." Ella Lenaina's defense attorney, Hartford's most prominent criminal lawyer, said that she had acted out of extreme emotional distress because her son had chosen to marry someone who was not right for him. He tried to make Ella Lenaina look like a loving mother who was driven to temporary insanity by the thought of her family's social destruction. The plan didn't work at all. The careful planning that went into getting arsenic oxide, the deliberate timing of the poisoning during the wedding ceremony, and Ella Lenaina's planned actions before and after the crime all showed that she had thought about it ahead of time, which goes against any claim of temporary insanity. Bridget's testimony was especially bad for Ella Lenaina's defense. The young woman had fully recovered from the arsenic poisoning, and she spoke about her wedding day with quiet dignity. The jury was very impressed by how smart and cultured she was, which went against Ella Lenaina's claim that she was an unsuitable immigrant. Bridget told the court, "I don't hate Mrs. Piton personally. I know she did it out of love for her son, even though that love was shown in horrible ways. But I can't forget that she tried to kill me because she thought my Irish heritage made me unworthy of her family." The worst part of the trial was when William gave his testimony. He talked about how much he loved both his mother and his wife, how shocked he was to find out about Ella Lenaina's crime, and how determined he was to make sure that justice was done, even if it meant going against his family. "My mother taught me to value honor, honesty, and moral courage," he told the court. "Those same values now mean that I have to tell the truth about what she did, no matter how hard that truth is to hear." The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a decision of guilty on charges of attempted murder. Judge Huntington sent Ella Lenaina to the Connecticut State Prison for 15 years. He said that her social status and good character in the past were taken into account when deciding how long she would be in prison. Judge Huntington said during sentencing, "The defendant's crime strikes at the heart of civilized society. When prejudice and social ambition lead to attempted murder, the law must respond with appropriate severity to protect all citizens, regardless of their background or origin." Eleanor took the sentence with the same calmness she had shown during the whole trial. As the court officers took her away to start her prison sentence, she didn't show any emotion. However, people who saw her leave the courtroom said she didn't look at William and Bridget. The Piton family's social standing in Hartford never got better after the scandal. Many of the families that had once welcomed William turned against him, but a few open-minded people in the community came to his and Bridget's aid. They moved to Boston soon after the trial, where William opened a successful law firm. They also raised 3 children, who became well-known residents of Massachusetts. Bridget turned out to be everything William thought she was: smart, kind, and dedicated to the well-being of their family. She got involved with charities that helped Irish immigrants and used her social status to connect established American families with newcomers looking for better lives. Ella Lenaina spent 12 years in prison before being let out for good behavior in 1853. She went back to Hartford as a broken woman, with most of her money gone because of legal fees and the costs of being in jail. She lived a quiet life in a small boarding house until she died in 1858. She never made up with William or met her grandchildren. Trinity Church melted down the silver chalice that was used in the poisoning and gave the medal to a fund for Irish immigrants. Father Matthews was very upset that a sacred ceremony had been broken while he was in charge. He put in place new rules for getting ready for weddings that made sure that more than one person was present when ceremonial items were being made. People in New England told the story of Ella Lenaina Piton as a warning about the dangers of unchecked bias and social ambition. Legal experts said it was a good example of how even the most powerful people in society had to follow the law when they did bad things. But the tragedy may have had the most lasting effect on Hartford's social attitudes toward Irish immigrants and other people who were new to American society. Many established families had to rethink their own biases and assumptions after Elena tried to kill Bridget just because of her race. Dr. Harrison, who saved Bridget's life with his quick thinking and medical knowledge, became a strong supporter of giving all patients the same level of care, no matter where they came from. His testimony during the trial showed how important it is to use scientific methods in criminal investigations. This helped make forensic medicine an important tool for police. The poisoned chalice case, as the papers called it, was still a hot topic in Hartford for many years after the trial ended. Parents told their kids Elena's story to show them how hatred and prejudice can corrupt people. At the same time, lawyers looked at the case as an example of how social tensions can lead to violent crime. William Peyton came back to Hartford for the first time since the trial in 1865, 24 years after the poisoning. Bridget and their 3 kids went with him to visit his father's grave and show his family the city where he grew up. People who lived there before and remembered the scandal were shocked by how happy and successful the couple was, even though their marriage almost ended in murder. Bridget, who is now 43 and has gray in her auburn hair, stood next to her husband at Jonathan Peyton's grave. She had never talked about forgiving Elena in public, but people who saw her pray quietly at the cemetery knew that she had come to terms with the horrible things that happened on her wedding day. The Hartford Courant, which had written a lot about the first trial, ran a short notice about the family's visit. The last sentence of that article summed up the most ironic thing about Eleanor's crime. The union that was almost destroyed by poison has instead grown into one of New England's most respected families, showing that love and character win over hate and prejudice.